Bawahlam it does spara fáilte occur riv on Tara Gudi on Chockenyu. That's my little bit for Chocolate the Gaelga. Good morning, Minister, and thank you for coming here today. This week in the Disability Matters Joint Oireachtas Committee, we heard very compelling advocacy from members of the Disability Committee in the National Women's Council and from Amy Hassett of the Disabled Women's Ireland. And it was really quite an extraordinary, very, very powerful meeting of the Disability Matters Committee. It was in Ms. Hassett's statement that she included the reference to the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act of 2015 and the fact that it has not commenced. Also, while noting that the Disability Miscellaneous Provisions Act as well as the Sign Language Act, there are elements of those two acts that also haven't, and I know that the sign language is particularly has been advocated by Oireachtas but I appreciate you're not here to talk about those today, but I'm just sticking them in as a reminder as well. I note, Minister, that Inclusion Ireland described the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act, highlighting that everyone is presumed to be able to decide for themselves, and that's really important unless the opposite is shown. The Act and the law sets out the ways to support people who lack capacity in making decisions. The new the Act also provides a move away from this idea of best interests and moving towards a rights-based decision-making capacity. And it is designed to meet the standards of respect and the needs for persons with intellectual disabilities, for people with decision-making ability that has been affected perhaps by traumatic brain injury, and for older people with diminished capacity or dementia. So I acknowledge, Minister, that the thrust of this Act is already in operation in the form of guidelines, and that great moves have been made in that regard throughout in both training, and I know I've been involved in it from a privacy and GDPR end in training of assisting people and ensuring that their capacity is taken to the fore. SAGE Advocacy also have noted that that the commencement of this Act will also ensure that information is imparted in a way that people can receive it and are best informed and assisted in making their decisions. So I suppose we see the thrust of all of our legislation. I think in the last year, since I've been here, I've noticed it particularly, and also prior to that, that we move away from a paternalistic approach and very much towards the person who is most affected being party to a decision. So I think that we've seen a lot of actions on the statute book that move in this direction, so they're well to be commended. I think the difficulty here, and why it's particular to this week, is that women tend to be the greater number who survive to old age and consequently can be particularly affected as a consequence. So I think they're disproportionately comprised in older age cohort and are more likely to be affected by a diminished capacity as a result. So there is a need for urgency in bringing in this Act. So I believe strongly that when it is commenced, we will see, we also need a decision-making campaign, an information campaign to ensure that everybody knows. One of the, not quite sure what happened with the clock, so apologies. I think that calls that I get would tend to be where people assume on next of kin. They assume that they have a legal status. They don't quite understand, the situation of power of attorney and enduring power of attorney. They don't understand the implications of things like that. So I think that when this comes in, it will also be important because naturally, if the decision maker is the person most affected, then they have a power and an agency that they maybe heretofore haven't had. So I think I would urge that also. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Ceann-Comhairle, and I wish to thank Senator Seery-Kearney for raising the issue on the commencement of the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act 2015, and it's important for women with disabilities. And I think also, Ceann-Comhairle, it also shows the relevance of the newly formed Committee of Disability Matters when we are actually getting into the nuts and bolts of actually discussing persons with disabilities and bringing on International Women's Week, bringing in such groups to show the impacts of not having the proper legislation in place and how it is restraining them. So I want to acknowledge this commitment which benefit women with disabilities who have capacity difficulties, and can assure you that everything is being done to ensure the commencement of the Act by June of next year. The Act is a very important piece of legislation that changes the existing law on capacity from status approach of the wardship system to a flexible functional approach, whereby capacity is assessed on an issue and time-specific basis. So that's addressing everything that you're speaking about there, Senator. It will abolish the wards of court system for adults by repealing the Lunacy Regulation, Ireland Act 1871. Adults currently in wardship will transition into the new decision-making support arrangements on a phased basis over 3 years from the date of commencement. The Government made a commitment in the programme for government to commencing the Act, recognising the importance of the much-needed reform it represents. The delay in commencement of the Act arises from two principal factors. The Decision Support Service, which will operate the progressive provisions of the Act, has become operational and will be able to respond to the complex decision-making needs of people with capacity difficulties. Amendments are also required to the Act before full commencement can take place. Work is actively taking place on the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Amendment Bill, which we expect to have enacted by year-end. These amendments will streamline processes in the interest of those using its provision. They will also strengthen the safeguards included in the Act. Some provisions of the Act have been commenced to enable recruitment of the Director of the Decision Support Service, the establishment of a multidisciplinary working group in relation to the Advanced Healthcare Directives, and most recently, on the 1st of February this year, the repeal of the Marriage of Lunacy Act, which means that a ward can now marry if he or she has the capacity to do so. The Decision Support Service has made considerable progress in putting in place an administrative and an IT system needed to operate the Act. To this end, just the budget gone, an amount of 5.8 million was secured to help fund. A high-level steering group chaired by the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth meets monthly to oversee and drive progress towards full commencement. The steering group comprises of senior officials from the Department of Health, Mental Health Reform, Court Services and Decision Support Service. This is in recognition of the fact that successful operation of the Act will involve multiple stakeholders, and they are working towards commencement of the legislation in June 2022, with the Decision Support Service opening the business immediately thereafter. So, to be honest, all the heavy lifting is being done to the front, so when the Act gets passed, the Decision Support Service will be open and ready for operation, with the staff in place and the ICT system ready to run it. And I do want to recognise the frustration of all the groups that might have come before the Disability Committee and will come, and they will tell you how this is restraining it, but you can now have a good understanding of the work that is going on. However, it is also important that we develop robust systems under the Decision Support Service that respond adequately to the needs of those with capacity difficulties and other families. And I'm confident that the time that we devote to now getting the process right with a person-centred approach will pay dividend in the end. Senator, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. I think it's very heartening that we have a lockdown timeframe. I think that's really good. It's also really good to hear of the monthly meetings of the steering group. And I suppose one of the things that I really regard and respect in this Act is this complete abolition of the horrible names of the Act in the past and everything. We both recoil, you in saying it and me in hearing it, and I think that so moving to that place of absolute respect for the integrity of the individual and their right to make decisions about their life is really, really to be welcomed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to conclude, I would like to assure the Senator that everything is being done that can be done, and we have a time frame and it is going to be measured. And at the end, it is all about communications, and it is exactly how we can empower people so it's person-centred completely. And in International Women's Week, because believe it or not, this is the only commencement I will be taking that's from my own brief, I would also like to acknowledge the Disabled Women's that were before you, but they also on Twitter had a fantastic tagline, disability is not a dirty word. And I really, really want to commend them. It got a lot of people talking during the week, but it also drove they asked some poignant questions. So I have to compliment the Disabled Women's Group for bringing disability to the forefront this week. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.